Good morning, students. In this E-class of BND Government Arts College, Chimanpura, we would take up for discussion the next sonnet prescribed in your syllabus. The sonnet is titled Death Be Not Proud, and the poet who has written this sonnet is John Donne. Death Be Not Proud is a 14-line poem which is written between February and August 1609. It was first published posthumously in 1633. What is a posthumous publication? The publication which is done after the death of the creator. So, after John Donne's death, it was published in 1633. Death Be Not Proud is the part of holy sonnets which John Donne has written. It is addressed to death. Generally, death is supposed to be mighty, death is supposed to be dreadful, it is supposed to be frightful. But Donne argues that death is neither mighty nor dreadful, and therefore it should not be proud. Death Be Not Proud, it presents argument against the power of death, and it gives a clear warning to death not to feel pride in its power. For the poet, such pride is merely illusion. Death is not at all mighty, it is not at all strong, but according to Donne, it is itself a slave or inferior to many. And the poet goes on arguing like a clever lawyer, and he gives argument after argument to prove his point. So when he says death is not mighty, death is not dreadful, by the end of the poem, the poet predicts the end of death. Death, thou shalt die. So this holy sonnet, which is sonnet number 10, is a devotional lyric that looks at life's biggest question and biggest fear in the context of Donne's beliefs, his arguments. With death's powerlessness, with death losing its pride, which is argued by the end of the poem, it is death itself, not man, who is going to die. So, before discussing the poem, let us first read the poem. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful. For thou art not so, for those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. So this is the first quatrain of the sonnet, the first 4 lines of the sonnet, and in these 4 lines, the speaker, the poet, clearly argues against death, which is being considered mightful and dreadful by everyone. In fact, the poet, he regards death as a poor being, as a pitiable being, and as a very petty being. Thou dost overthrow, die not, and nor yet canst thou kill me. Both of these phrases, they establishes the death as inferior, as pitiable, and as a powerless being. So as it happens with Donne's poem, the sonnet, it starts boldly and in a very conventional way, without any pride, without any fear, without being afraid. Death is actually personified and addressed as a silent listener. And Donne proceeds like a clever lawyer to prove that death is not dreadful, it is not mighty, it is not fearful. So the poet wants death to avoid the pride and the haughty feeling that it has, or which is attributed by everyone to death. In the second quatrain, the poet says, "From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery." So this quatrain, it expands the argument that death, it should not feel proud and aggressive. And the poet, he goes on proving his point of view. Death is compared to sleep and rest. So death is not dreadful for those whom death supposedly think that it can kill. Because people, they do not die, they only sleep a long and peaceful sleep. So rest and sleep, it resemble death. And as comfort and pleasure and rest flows from sleep, so greater comfort and pleasure must come from death. And this is the reason that there's no reason to fear or being frightful from death. So people, they generally feel good after sleep and rest. So why shouldn't they feel good after death? Because this is the rest to their bones and soul's delivery. So when he says, "Soonest our best man with thee do go," that means that those who are virtuous, those who are the best man, they voluntarily go along with death. Because after death, their journey begins on towards eternity and towards freedom. So the bold statement that death, it cannot kill, it is just a transportation, it is just a journey to afterlife, is something which is established, and death cannot kill is also established. In the third quatrain, the poet says, "Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate man, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then?" So the poem argues that death is not a master, it is a slave. And as an inferior being, it is a slave and it is governed by fate, chance, kings, and desperate man. Thus, death is not a master, but it is a slave. And it is not actually residing, it is not dwelling in a very comfortable position, but it is dwelling with the hateful things like poison, war, and sickness, which we do not cherish. So there's no luxury that is associated with death. Death is not a master, it is a slave, and even as form of inducing the eternal sleep, the eternal rest with death is not impressive at all. As the dwelling of death is not impressive, as it lives with poison, war, and sickness, even the form of death is not impressive. As poppy and charm, they are better means of obtaining rest, so death has nothing to feel proud of. And the argument is further strengthened. It cannot be regarded as dreadful in any way. In the final couplet, the poet says that one short sleep past, and we wake eternally, and death shall be no more, death thou shalt die. So the poet says that death has only one function, and that is transporting people towards eternity. So there's no reason at all for death to feel proud or to feel powerful or to feel mighty or to feel pride, because death can make us sleep only for a short while. And after the short sleep in the grave, we all will wake in another world and we would live there eternally. So then death would not have power over us. Means once we are transported to another world, it is death itself which dies. So death does not kill us, it is death itself which would die. Death, thou shalt die. So in this way, the sonnet, it ends with the paradox, with the argument that is firmly and very strongly established by the poet. So, Death Be Not Proud is another of the holy sonnets, and it is addressed to death. The poet begins up with an argument like a clever lawyer, and he states his point of view that death, it does not have any right to feel pride, to feel proud. And having stated this point of view, Donne proceeds on giving argument after argument to prove his point of view. For him, death is not dreadful, and even those whom death thinks that it is supposed to kill or it has killed are not killed in reality, because those who die, they are only in a condition of sleep, a long and peaceful sleep. The picture of death is rest and sleep, is associated with rest and sleep. Therefore, there's no reason to feel frightful from death, because rest and sleep both are very pleasurable condition to a human being. A greater comfort, a greater pleasure results from rest and sleep. This is the picture of death. And for Donne, death is not mighty. It is not like a mighty, powerful king, but it is a very wretched kind of a slave. It is a slave to fate, chance, wicked and malicious person, war, sickness, poison, and death is just an instrument. It is not a cause, and it obeys the call of fate, chance, wicked, malicious person. So the power that is associated with death, the aggression that is associated with death, the power that is associated with death is meaningless, because death itself obeys the call of fate, chance, wicked and malicious person that he states. Even the company that it keeps is a wretched company, as sickness, old age, diseases, which is not pleasing or which is not welcoming or which is not frightful to anyone. Donne also states that death cannot be regarded as glorious. It cannot be regarded as mighty in any way, because even opium preparations or magical properties or charm, they can induce better sleep than death. So even death does not have the power to give. And so he firmly states by the end of the poem that death should not feel proud at all for its power, because death only has the capacity to make us sleep only for a short period of time. After this short period of time in our graves, after this short sleep in our graves, all of us, we are going to wake up and we are going to transport it to another world and live there eternally. And in that particular day, death would have no power over anyone, and death itself would die, because our soul, it would gain freedom, it would gain eternity. So in this way, the sonnet, it ends with a paradox which the poet, he goes on establishing and he goes on proving. Because after our death, he believes in the Christian thought, in the Christian belief that all of us, we would live forever in the other world as per the teachings of the Bible or as per the dictates of God. The structure of the sonnet is, again, sonnet is a line of 14 sonnet is a poem of 14 lines, and this holy sonnet, it takes up the Shakespearean form. The Shakespearean form of sonnet of 3 quatrain and a couplet. Quatrain is a set of 4 lines and couplet is a set of 2 lines. John Donne, from 1572 to 1631, is generally regarded as the central figure, the founder of the metaphysical school of poetry, which flourished in the early half of the 17th century. Donne's colloquial rhythms, his imagery, his physiology were freely imitated by the poets of 17th century. In his own lifetime, his poems were circulated in manuscript and they were first published only in 1633 after his death. The poetry of John Donne may be broadly divided into 2 groups: secular poems and divine poems. The secular poems comprise songs and sonnets, the elegies, the satires, verse letters, epithalamiums or marriage songs, the progress of the soul, the anniversaries, and the religious poetry. It comprises the divine poems and holy sonnets.